Hey up everyone, today I'm going to talk about the bikes that were once the kings of the road and track. The 750cc class has taken a back seat in recent years, although there has been a bit of a resurgence in some ways. The rumours in MotoGP of a move to a smaller capacity have now been confirmed for 2027, so we will now have a new 850cc category set to replace the litre bikes at the top of world racing. Once, the 750cc class was the most fought over in the motorcycle industry, and in this video I will talk about the bikes that defined that class for me. Before we get to what I consider the pinnacle of the 750 class, we do need to look at some context. So for those who want to, you can click to the list proper now, but you won't get the full story if you do. The Europeans had always dominated when it came to fast, large capacity motorcycles. The Americans made bigger engines, but they didn't have the performance the European brands did. However, both knew the Japanese were setting to challenge their dominance. 1968 gave us Lino Tonti's masterpiece, the Moto Guzzi V7. This was the forerunner of the 750S and eventually the legendary Le Mans 850. But in many ways, it was the V7 that defined the Moto Guzzi brand. The engine format became synonymous with the name, and Moto Guzzi have continued with that format right up to the modern day. The British had their 750s too. BSA and Triumph had decided on a high-performance triple as their flagship, and again, it was in 1968 that the Triumph T150 and BSA Rocket 3 rolled into the showrooms. I've talked about the 750 triple in the best sounding four-stroke motorcycles video linked above, and they were, at least on paper, the fastest production motorcycle available in 1968. That was, however, a hotly contested claim. In 1969, it was Laverde who began to rise through the ranks of the most desired motorcycle brands. This was the year the new 750 parallel twin began to succeed in the endurance racing world, and the Laverde 750S was released as a production bike. Behind the scenes, though, work had already begun on a new Laverde 750 overhead cam prototype triple engine. The 750 triple would never come to market, but its engineering would be used in the development of what became the Jota and 3C 1000cc triples. And these are the bikes that would define the Laverde name for many. But it was that 750cc twin engine that won them more races than any other. 1969 also gave us the BMW R75-5 and the Honda CB750, so the marketplace was awash with new 750cc motorcycles that would stretch both our abilities and our finances to whole new limits. MV Agusta entered the market with their 750S, and Ducati had their 750 GT prototype at shows in 1970, although it didn't go into production until 71 to my knowledge. Then, in 1971, the two-strokes hit the 750 class. Kawasaki gave us the H2 Mach 4, and Suzuki came to market with the GT750. All of these bikes created a frenzy in the sales rooms around the world, and set new standards of power and performance. They carved their own individual niches, but there was always at least one eye on the top speed they could reach. The Formula 750 World Championship had begun in 1973, and Barry Sheene took the first title, but it was a short-lived series and was dominated by Yamaha. They won every year after the Suzuki of Sheene, from 1974 to the last championship in 79. But these were the two-strokes, and it was in 1977 that the Formula TT series was born. Giacomo Agostini announced he would never race at the TT again after his close friend was killed in 1972, and the TT became an even more contentious race. Barry Sheene, Kenny Roberts and other riders in the championship all refused to race there, and as a Grand Prix circuit it was on borrowed time. Shortly after the 1976 TT, the FIM finally announced the Isle of Man TT would be wiped from the racing calendar. Organisers at the TT got together with the Autocycle Union and devised a new series that would include the infamous Isle of Man TT. It started as simply the Isle of Man TT and the Ulster Grand Prix, but by 1984 it had grown to 6 events, and eventually from 1986 there were 8 races held around the world in such exalted circuits as San Marino, Misano, Hockenheim, the Isle of Man, Assen, Jerez, Imatra, and the Ulster Grand Prix at Dundrod. The Blue Ribbon Formula 1 class was originally 4 strokes from 600 to 1000cc and 2 strokes from 350 to 500cc. However, this was reduced to a 750cc maximum in 1984. In the same way that Yamaha dominated the 750 World Championships, it was Honda who were unbeatable in the F1 TT Championship. There is some incredible footage from the Isle of Man and Dundrod I wish I could have used here, but the risk's too high, so I put it up on the backup channel as a tribute to Joey Dunlop and the people who raced alongside him. Do go take a look, and don't forget to subscribe there too. Although the channel's less at risk now, last year taught me how brutal YouTube can be. Anyway, the Formula TT Championship continued until 1990, but it was in 1988 that the world racing scene changed with the birth of the World Superbike Championship. This championship pitted 750cc 4-cylinder bikes against 1000cc twins and would eventually replace the successful Formula TT Championship. It was the beginning of the modern World Superbikes era. It wasn't until 2003 that the rules were changed to allow 1000cc 4-cylinder bikes because the twins had dominated so much, and since then the regulations have been changed again and again. But at the start, the 750cc bikes were the kings of the road. This is the background of racing that all these bikes were born into, and I hope it helps you put their achievements into perspective. Remember, if you do enjoy it, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more motorcycle madness. Anyway, from the start, the first 750 Formula TT races in 1984 until the mid-1990s when the twin-cylinder 1000cc Ducati and Hondas took over, the 750 superbikes were always the fastest. In America, it was 1983 that the rules changed to reduce the maximum capacity in the AMA Championships to 750, and here the return to the litre class wouldn't happen until 2002. So between 1985 and 2000, the world had a very lively hotbed of racing available to any manufacturer who could build a 750cc 4-stroke superbike good enough to win. Every manufacturer had their own timeline, and I will try and give you an idea of the progressions. And I will start with Suzuki. The Suzuki GS750 hit the market in 1976, but by 1980 we had the GSX 750. Then, in 82, we got the now legendary GSX 750S Katana. Each new model pushed up the level of performance, and each manufacturer was looking to outperform the others. Then, in 1985, we got the first ever GSXR 750. This was the start of a new era of performance, and it's this period I will be looking at closely today. If you would like a video specifically about the older 750s, let me know in the comments, and I will gladly oblige. Anyway, the Suzuki GSXR 750 set a new performance benchmark in the 750 class, and it is the only one of the bikes here that is still on sale today. That has to be a testament to the original idea, and Suzuki have kept to that original script with every new model released. Unlike all the previous 750s, with the possible exception of the Yamaha TZ750, which was only available as a production bike in a few markets, this was a true race replica, a ballistic 100 horsepower 4-cylinder 4-stroke that looked like it had rolled straight out of the paddock at the Macau Grand Prix. The look was based on the work Suzuki endurance racers from the previous year, and complete with twin headlamp fairings, it rolled into and out of the showrooms. The new oil-cooled engine allowed the designers to push the limits of what had been possible before, and every component was built lighter as well as stronger. This allowed the new engine to rev safely up to an 11,000 RPM redline. Maximum torque of 73 Newton meters didn't hit until 10,000 RPM, and max power hit only 500 RPM later at 10,500 RPM. This narrow power band meant it wasn't the easiest bike to ride fast, but for someone who could ride, they were one of the fastest bikes around. The aluminium chassis was stiffer as well as lighter, and especially on the earlier models, could be difficult to set up. As with the engine, the margin for error was narrow. Get it right, and they were a sweet handling bike, but getting it right could be a real art form. As the years passed by, there were many updates, giving us bikes like the Slingshot and the equally legendary S-Rad among many others. To many, though, it was these early slab-side GSXRs that would redefine the 750 class. Lighter than the bigger, more powerful superbikes, they were easier to ride and in most cases faster on the roads and on track. Suzuki's design was honed gradually because the recipe was right from the start. Build the most powerful and lightest 750cc engine you could, wrap it in a lightweight frame, make it look and ride like a real race bike, and watch the sales roll in. Yamaha had been trying everything in the engine development department. They were experimenting with multi-valve arrangements to extract the maximum power from their engines. Not content with the 4-valve arrangements they'd already mastered, they'd tried 2 different 6-valve arrangements and even a 7-valve per cylinder head. The final decision was that the extra weight and complexity of the 6 and 7-valve arrangements made them unusable, but they discovered that a 5-valve arrangement increased both fuel flow and efficiency while adding minimum weight. This is the format that spawned the Yamaha Genesis engines, and the FZ750 was their initial offering in 1985. This was an affordable sports bike, not a homologation special, but it produced 105 horsepower and 91 Nm of torque straight out of the crate. The engine had been tilted forward dramatically at a 45-degree angle, which lowered the centre of gravity and created an almost perfect directional fuel flow through the carbs. It was heavier than the opposition at 206 kilos dry, but it handled like a dream. Although it was successful in the showrooms, Yamaha were on a mission to win the championships again, and in 1987 they released the first FZR 750. This was a bike built to be ridden to its limits, and those limits were being pushed every year. It wasn't more powerful than the others, but the engine just had more punch, and the Genesis head was a revelation. Improving fuel efficiency, it created more power and better fuel economy. Then, in 1989, we got the first of Yamaha's FZR 750RR OW01 race bikes. Now these were homologation specials, built as a road-going race bike, and they were as fast as anything on the roads. Yamaha had shortened the engine using a 40-degree inclination on the block, and the chassis was shortened too. It used the twin-spar aluminium perimeter frame that was developed from the endurance races of the day, and every piece of the bike was honed and the engine tuned to over 120 horsepower. Final weight was around 185 kilos dry, and Yamaha managed to do what they have always done best. This was a bike with fantastic components throughout, but it was so much more than the sum of its parts. On track, in the club and national championships, they were often on top, but it was Thomas Stevens who gave them their only AMA championship in 1991, and they never managed to win the 750cc era of world superbikes. By 1993, we had a new, lighter and more powerful YZF 750R, being ridden to its absolute limits by the likes of James Whittam among many others. It racked up many more titles in the various national scenes, but sadly just never succeeded in winning the World Championship. 1984 had seen the launch of the Kawasaki GPZ 750R, or the ZXR 750 as it was known in some markets. The bike was fast for sure, and they sold well, but it never had the racing pedigree they wanted, and it wasn't until the release of the Kawasaki ZXR 7H1 in 1989 that they could say that they truly had a competitive race bike in the 750 class. The Kawasaki ZXR H1 and the later H2 models were not the expensive homologation specials other manufacturers had opted for. These were road-going bikes built for the masses. They weren't the expensive race bikes on offer elsewhere, but they were fast, nimble and a joy to ride. They collected wins in the AMA Championships and in World Superbikes. Doug Chandler won in 1990, then Scott Russell in 1992. Russell went on to win in World Superbikes a year later in 1993 too. The Kawasaki ZX7R, the later ZXR 750 and the ZX7RR cemented Kawasaki's reputation for making fast, reliable and exciting sports bikes at a much cheaper price than their competitors. The 750 Kawasaki changed a lot over the years, but it kept its reputation throughout. Production continued right up until 2003, but it is the early H1 and H2 models that are still remembered most fondly. Compared to the homologation specials, it might be considered lacking by some top-level riders, but compare it to the standard models in the other ranges, and it stood up to the test and came through with flying colours. Honda had a conundrum. Should they stick with the across-the-frame 4 design that had served them so well, or gamble again and see if they could rescue the reputation of the VF range? The original Honda VF 750 Interceptor had arrived in 1983, but there had been a major blunder, and the cams and camshaft tensioners had been made from cheese. Honda's reputation for bomb-proof reliability was in tatters, and it had cost them heavily in sales. So Ichiro Honda split the R&D department in two and locked them away at different ends of the factory. Each was told to build the best 750 they could. One a V4 and the other an across-the-frame 4. The resulting third generation of the V4 engine was first used in the 1986 VFR 750, and it was this engine that would end up being considered by some as the best engine Honda ever made. The engine had a 180-degree crank and a new firing order to replace the earlier 360-degree crank. It had also lost the forked rocker arms and now had individual rocker arms for each lobe on the cams. Valve timing had been changed too, to maximise power at 10,500 RPM, and gear-driven cams sat in ball bearing races with multiple oil feeds to minimise any wear issues. Pistons, rings, valves, cams, con rods and crankshaft were all lighter than in the previous models. It had a bigger airbox and the carbs had been repositioned to improve fuel flow, and a new exhaust system designed too. All of this helped to push the maximum power up to over 105 horsepower. 1987 saw the release of the CBR 750 Hurricane. It had the same gear-driven cams as the VFR 750, and in the end, many solutions were shared. The Hurricane was just 1 horsepower down on the VFR, and it was also 1 kilo heavier, but it did produce slightly more torque. In the real world, the only difference in performance was down to the rider. They were equals in almost every way, but it would be the VFR that would become Honda's new flagship. It was rumoured to have been a complete financial failure. It had eaten so much money in research and development, but Honda's reputation had been saved, and the VFR would go on to become known as one of the most dependable and exhilarating bikes ever made during that era. 1987 also saw the birth of the race-bred Honda RC30. This was the homologation special built to win the World Superbike title. It used the third generation of Honda's 750cc V4 engine with gear-driven cams, but it used a 360-degree crankshaft like the original 1983 750 Interceptor. That crankshaft redesign helped push the power curve up to a 12,500 RPM redline, and this bike had a droning exhaust note that changed from haunting to nerve-tingling as the revs rose higher. The RC30's engine had titanium conrods topped with lightweight short-skirt pistons. It would produce around 115 horsepower, and the whole bike weighed in at just 185 kilos dry. It would go on to dominate in the Formula TT, AMA, and in World Superbikes for the next few years. Then we saw the birth of a bike you might not expect to hear about in the 750 class. But it was in 1989 that the very first Fireblade prototype was built, and it was actually a 750. The CBR 750RR Fireblade prototype was built to create the lightest high-power sports bike possible, but with the success of the VFR 750 and the CBR 1000, the final decision was to stroke the original 750 engine to create a 900cc bike that produced the power of a litre bike, but was as close to the size and weight of a racing 750 superbike as possible. They succeeded, and the rest is history. But it meant the 750 Fireblade was never put into production. 1994 saw the introduction of the Honda RC45 and the RVF 750s. This was Honda's final attempt to knock the 1000cc Ducati twins off the top step with a 750. The RVF was another masterpiece from Honda, but it never achieved the success of the RC30, and it failed in its attempt to dethrone the Ducatis in World Superbikes. There's one more bike that I have to give an honorary mention to. Well, two actually, but both were built in the same factory at Borgo Panigale in Bologna, Italy. When compared on paper to the four-cylinder race-bred bikes coming out of Japan, the Ducati 748R, first released in 1995, might seem lacking, unrefined and expensive. But the 748R was a motorcycle that defied the laws of physics. It was built around the chassis and running gear of the 916 that arrived the year before. The engine of the 748 was tuned very differently though. It produced nearly as much power as the 916, with almost 100 horsepower on tap. But to get that power, it needed to be revved hard. The V twin design and a maximum torque figure of 75 Newton meters might make you think it had plenty of low-down grunt, but it didn't. That max torque figure didn't hit until almost 9,000 RPM. And in many ways, you could say it was more like riding a two-stroke with its narrow power band. We got the R model, then the SP model, and even SPS and Biposta versions in 1999. It was never the bike to choose for a relaxing ride out, but as a track weapon, it was incredible. Stir up that gearbox and let the engine rev, and you were rewarded with a rush of power that was utterly addictive. I would also say the handling was only rivalled by the final era of the Zane Laverda twins, which I talk about in the 12 Unbelievable Italian Motorcycles video linked above. After the 748R in 2003 came the Ducati 749, and this is a motorcycle that will always split opinions. The twin vertically mounted projector headlights gave it a unique and unusual look, which some loved and others hated. The engine was the first 750cc Testa Stretta engine. Ducati had given it a high compression ratio and increased the bore size and shortened and lightened the crank to make the engine rev even more cleanly. they managed to squeeze even more power from the new 750 engine, but that was just the start. The 749 was a total redesign, with few parts carried over from the 748, yet it retained that essential race bike feel that the 748 had. The 748 and 749 never got the acclaim of their bigger brothers, purely and simply because it was the bigger V-twins that kept winning the championships. But that takes nothing away from these two utterly fantastic bikes. I wonder if the new 850cc machines that inevitably come from the new MotoGP regs will have the same impact these bikes did. Let me know what you think in the comments. Well, there you have it, my breakdown of what I consider the golden years of the 750cc class. These bikes are all now quickly becoming the most sought after collector's bikes on the market, built at a time when R&D budgets were routinely thrown out of the window by designers and engineers who created these utterly incredible bikes. I would argue that in many ways they represent the pinnacle of motorcycle design. They may not be the most powerful or the fastest in a straight line, but in the real world they will all outperform all but the very best riders. They all deserve their place in the motorcycle history books, and I for one give thanks to the people that made them possible and to the racers who made them all sing on the track. As always, thanks for watching, and this video does link into several others on the channel, so I hope you will have a look around. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit the like button, it really does help, and I would be honoured if you would subscribe and join the ranks of the best motorcycle community on YouTube. That way you make sure, or at least in theory, that you find out about the videos first. Do remember to check back though, because YouTube does seem to have an increasing habit of just pushing newer channels alongside the big ones, so those of us in the middle ground are getting squeezed out. Do remember to check out the website too, and the Redbubble page, as well as the blogs and articles about the videos. You get the best biker merchandise anywhere. And always remember, keep your spanners close and your keys even closer. Ride free, everyone!